Hi, my fraction friends. You've learned so much about fractions. Today I want to kind of pull it all together for you and talk about some strategies for comparing fractions. So we've looked at quite a few different ways of comparing fractions, and so you'd have to be pretty flexible depending on what kind of fractions you were being asked to figure out. Which one is more, less, or are they the same? So I wanted to share with you some ideas about that. So here's the first idea. I've written 1/8 excuse me, and 1/2. Did you notice that both of those are unit fractions? Remember, unit fractions have 1 in the numerator. So if they're both unit fractions, anytime that you have two unit fractions, they're kind of the easiest ones to compare. Because if you think about it, would you rather have 1 piece out of 8 or 1 piece out of 2, depending on what the thing is that you're comparing? Let's just make a quick diagram, a quick jot, knowing that they won't be perfect. But if I make two quick rectangles that I'm trying to make be the same, and I know that they're not exactly the same, and I divide this one into 8 equal pieces, and I divide this one into 2 equal pieces, and I shade 1 out of 8 and 1 out of 2, as you know, it's really obvious that 1 piece out of 2 pieces is larger than 1 piece out of 8 if both of the wholes are the same size. So the strategy is, if the numerators are the same unit fractions, then it's pretty easy to compare them because 1 out of 8 is a lot smaller than 1 out of 2. So we would write 1 out of 8 is less than 1 out of 2. 1 out of 8 is less than 1 out of 2. We could do another quick one, 1/5 or 1/4. So is 1 out of 5 bigger or smaller than 1 out of 4? So if we made two rectangles and I would divide this into 5 pieces and this into 4 pieces, these would be smaller pieces. So 1/5 again would be less than 1/4. So that's one strategy. If they're unit fractions and they both have numerators of 1, then look at the denominator and see how big the pieces will be, and that will help you to compare. All right, next strategy. It's fun in my office, I can just throw things on the floor. Okay, here's the next one. What if the denominators are the same? What if you're comparing sixths to sixths? Which is more? Are 2/6 more or is 5/6 more? See, it's kind of easy because if we make two quick rectangles, trying to make them be the same size, and I cut this one into sixths, and I cut this one into sixths, do you see how they're both getting divided into the same number of parts? So now the way to figure it out is, well, how many are shaded? 2 are shaded here, and 5 are shaded here. So when the denominator is the same, when you're comparing sixths to sixths, it's really quite easy because 2/6 would be less than 5/6. 2/6 is less than 5/6. So let's try this with eighths. Let's see. If we had 7/8 and we had 3/8. So you're dividing, you're portioning something into 8 equal parts here and 8 equal parts here. But in this one you get 7 out of the 8, and this one you get 3 out of the 8. I think it's fairly obvious to you that 7 out of 8 is more. I have to do it this way because it's upside down. I'm going to get it wrong. 7/8 is more than 3/8. I just couldn't make that greater than, less than sign upside down. All right, so the first strategy was if they both have 1 as the numerator, then compare them by the denominators. But if the denominator is the same, then you have to check the numerator, the top number. Well, if only it was that easy all the time, but it's not. Sometimes they have different numerators and different denominators. A lot of times, actually. So what are some ways we can think about this? Well, we could draw pictures. We could draw number lines. Yep. And I like to do the number line one. So I'm going to put 0, 1, and 1/2. For me, this is a really good way to compare the fractions because I can say, is 7/8 nearer to 0? Is it equal to 1/2? Or is it nearer to 1 whole? So let's think about eighths. How many eighths would be a half? 4/8 is a half. So 7/8 would be more than that. And actually, what makes a whole? 8/8 makes a whole. See how I'm thinking this through? So 7/8 is almost a whole thing. So I'll make a circle here. I'll graph 7/8 on this line. And now I have to do the same thing for fourths. So how many fourths makes a half? Where would the half be? 2/4. 2 out of 4 is a half. So is 1/4 less than 2/4 or more than 2/4? Obviously, 1/4 is less. So I'll put 1/4 here. Once you do that, and it's way harder, of course, than the same numerator or same denominator, but once you do all that thinking through, now that you know so much about fractions, it's pretty obvious that 7/8 would be more than 1/4. But it is a fair amount of work, isn't it? And you could draw pictures. Sometimes that's tricky though if you have thirds or if you have to draw fifths. Those are really hard to divide. So a number line can be a really slick way to do it. It's a lot of work though. Here's my last one. Sorry, it's stuck. So are the numerators the same? Are the denominators the same? So this is that kind where we have to do some thinking. So I could do some thinking and I could say, let's think about 0, 1/2, and 1/2. Is 2/8 closer to 0, equal to a half, or closer to 1? 4 out of 8 is a half. 2 out of 8 will be somewhere over here. So I'm just going to write the 2 out of 8 over here. 3 out of 5. You know, it's really hard because you can't cut 5 in half. It's an odd number. But if I had 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5. Do you see where 3 out of 5 ends up? 4 out of 5. If I have 3 out of 5, it's a little bit more than a half. So I would put 3 out of 5 here. Actually, if you had, say, $5, each person would get $2.50, right? So that would be a half of 5. So 3 is more than 2.5. So what would you say? Is 3/5 more or less than 2/8? 3/5 is more than 2/8. So those are 3 strategies that I taught you. The first one is if the numerators are the same, then take a look at the size of the pieces. And the second one is if the denominator's the same, then the pieces are all the same size. How many do you have? And if they are not the same number, then you need to take a look at how they compare to 0, a half, and 1/2. Awesome. So you've learned an awful lot. I'm going to give you some practice to do on IXL, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Take care.